Pleasure to meet you. I'm super
Nice to meet
excited
you
for this
too.
interview and finding out more about what's happening in Indonesia and where you're at. But I
Sure.
won't tell your story. Please give us your background, where you're from, where you went to college, and where you're at right now.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Grant, for having me here. So, everyone, my name is Edmund. So, I'm from Indonesia. So, I spent my childhood in Indonesia before I continue my study in the US. So, I spent around 7 years all the way in San Diego for college and work before I moved to Singapore for another 7 years for work and also to finish my MBA. And then 12 years ago, I decided to move back to Indonesia, because I wanted to start my own business, basically. And I thought Indonesia is probably the best place to get started with.
I definitely want to hear why you think that in a little bit. But I like that you're not just an investor now. You actually started your own businesses. You're actually an entrepreneur first. So we started with, make sure I'm pronouncing this right, Wakatobi Eyewear and Pets.id. If you give us a brief kind of history and story and like what was the problem you were trying to solve with this?
Sure. Well, it's gonna be a long story.
We got time.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated with the computer and internet technology, since I was young. So when I was younger, my parents bought me these PCs, right? And I like to spend like hours in there playing games, video games. And I remember I also took some, computing course for programmings, but basically it's my hobbies. I wasn't really like an outdoor type of guy. I like to stay inside and spend time in my PCs. So that's where it all started, where I want to be in the tech sector. And high school years, the internet coming into Indonesia, right? And, the technology back then was still in the early iteration. So if you remember, we have the dial-up modem. So when you want to connect to internet, you need to switch on the hardware, and then it makes like very, very loud noises for a good few minutes, and then you get connected, But back then, data transfer is still a little bit slow. So when you try to download pictures or a song, it probably could take you up to 30 minutes to 1 hour, right? But it's a very exciting experience back then. You just feel like, you get connected to the outside world, right? And then my college years I spent in the US, where the internet was much more advanced back then. It was back in maybe 2002. And that's where the era of like a tech companies are thriving, right? You get the early days of Amazon's. You got this first social media we call Friendster back then. I don't know if you
got to see a very interesting side of California at that time, because if you're there in 2002, you probably just missed the 2000s .com bubble.
Right.
So all the companies that were just way overvalued collapsed, but the ones like Amazon and other ones that like had a strong base and PayPal and different ones like that, they were able to continue through it because they weren't raising rounds just based off of like clicks. They were raising off of like revenue and growth and consistency. They were tighter on their budgets instead of what's the old cliche of Google, like they got massage chefs, pool tables. So you got to see it at a very interesting time.
Yeah. I mean, Yahoo, was probably, my most of my time was spent on Yahoo, just browsing and get connected with people. But I guess what's interesting for me, the most useful use case was, I was able to communicate with people back home in Indonesia, using these internet technologies. And that's where I know, I wanted to do something in this area. Yeah, but fun fact, I'm a computer science dropout in college, so I switched to chemistry. So I was actually I was holding a chemistry major. So I work in the pharmaceutical company as an R&D chemist doing drug discovery for a good 5 years in Singapore. before,
Yeah.
before I thought I don't want to do this anymore because my patience is not, really in that area. I wanted to be a founder.
Were you still
Yes.
like tinkering with computer stuff while you were also? We
Just
hear a
for-
very common theme from entrepreneurs. They usually have a day job, and then they say, "What my real passion, you do on nights and weekends until you can get it up and going." So I'm assuming you were still working with computers and like prototyping things and making original websites. Probably then.
Yes, I always had, one eye, on the sectors, always have something going on in my mind about what kind of ideas that I want to do later on. So, that's how I decided also that I wanted to go back to Indonesia, because I tried took MBAs and all that, but I guess I just think that, I should follow my passions. And yeah, I decided to move back home and started those two ventures that you just mentioned, right? So I think the story behind it is, Wakatobi is a D2C direct to consumers eyeglasses brand, right? So the idea coming from Warby Parker's, I think you're familiar, is quite successful US startups in eyeglasses, who managed to win IPOs and open hundreds of stores in the US. But the idea is, what's interesting for me is not just the idea of how they combining this online technology with offline retail experience, right? But I think back then it was the idea of introducing the idea of vertically integrated business, which means that they handle everything from productions to distribution. So basically, they control the whole value chains of the business, right? And what I see in Indonesia, I think the sector itself, we have a big population, it's a big market. But if you see in the eyeglasses sector as well, it's pretty much, you can find, it's very fragmented. You can find the high-end brands, and you can find the very cheap ones, bootlegs and all that, but nothing in between, So I saw an opportunity to do the same model as Warby Parker Indonesia, and that's how I started Wakatobi. Actually, it was a profitable business from day one. It's a retail business. You get a big chunk of margins, and we managed to release like 2 collections of items, right? But the thing is, we need money we need capital for the inventories, right? With this type of business, and the cash flow we generated is not enough. And we tried to raise fund. It was back in 2014, around that time, and it's still a very, very early phase in Indonesia for VC to come in, right? You can count with 10 fingers the VCs as in Indonesia, and the sector that they're looking for definitely was not a D2C. Yeah, it's not even a jargon back then yet, right? So
where did you end up raising the money from investors in Indonesia, or did you have to go outside?
Back then I didn't manage to raise anything. So we bootstrap all the way. Yeah, and that's at the end I couldn't find any investments. So we managed to put it on hold. We decided to put it on hold. But myself, I decided to start a new ventures. This time
Gotta keep moving forward. Gotta keep moving forward,
Yeah. So this time it's in pet industries. I think the thesis around this is, I think initially it's the same. If you look at in the developed countries like in the US, per se, again, the subsector of the pet industry itself, for example, like pet insurance alone, it worth $billions. It's $1 billion business, right? But closer to home, what I see in the neighboring countries like China and Japan, you see the trend of emerging middle class, right? So that means they have more disposable incomes to spend on things, right? One of the things they spend is hobby, and one of the hobby is owning a pet, right? And that's what I see in Indonesia back then. What I saw was I think the economy is getting better and the middle class is growing, so I predicted the same trend will happen in Indonesia. So that's how I ended up with Pets.id. And the idea of the company is to build a companion app for pet owners. So whatever you need for your pets, you can find on one app, right? I think the other thesis that I have is, since it's considered as a hobby or family members, right? You are willing to spend more, right? So your basket size is bigger than the average e-commerce. And the second, the lifetime value is very long, because as the idea of companion app, you use the app for the rest of the life of the pets, which span 10 to 12 years, right? So I think based on those two theories or thesis, decided to start a project in pets. And this time I managed to raise fund.
I heard a study once. It was talking about, the main topic was people taking care of themselves. But the study showed that people are more consistent at giving their pets, like their dogs and their cats, medicine that they need than they are at giving themselves medicine.
Yeah, exactly.
It sounds like a very stable market.
Yeah, I mean, if you take your pets to the vets, it costs you more than for humans, right? Yeah.
Very much.
So the idea, is going around that ideas, and I managed to raise fund this time, not from institutional VC, but more from a strategic investors, right? So I managed to use the capital to raise to grow the team, to build products and all that. I got some tractions, but then this is the one lessons I learned from that ventures. I miscalculated the market size, actually. I think, on paper it looks very big. I think based on data, I think half of the Indonesian populations own the pet, right? Spending is big, but this is where I made a mistake. Actually you need to take into consideration of the GDP as well, GDP of the country, which means the spending power of people, right? And it's actually quite lower, much lower compared to like the countries that I mentioned, like US or China and Japan, right? So that means people are not willing to spend as much as I predicted, for their pets in Indonesia. So that makes the market much smaller, for the people who's willing to spend. And
so out of those two startups, Wakatobi and Pets.id, what would you say are the two main lessons you learned from those startups? Whenever we have our students, we go per semester program, and I just know plenty of founders who have shut down startups. There's usually one big takeaway they get from their their startup shut down, that they take into the next one and learn and do even better. So what would you say were the two kind of main lessons you learned from those?
Okay, well, if you want to go into specific, I think in Wakatobi, I think I learned that timing is also important when you start a business, right? You have a good products, you have a good solutions, but if the timing is wrong, in a sense, like people are not ready to accept your product, or you couldn't find any finding, it's not of the interest of the investor at the time, it's going to be quite difficult to grow, right? In Pets.id, the lesson is quite different, I tried to do too many things at one time, right? I mean, the thought process was, more revenue streams, and then you can grow, right? Because you get more and more income to your company. But it actually created more issues, rather than benefits for you, right? So that means you have more problems to tackle. You have more problems to solve, within the company, and you need more resources to do that, right? So at the end of the day, you ended up solving too many things at once, and you deplete your research.
I was just talking with a student yesterday about that, and he's like, we could build the product that does this and this and this, and we can have an accessory store and this. No. We're going to do one thing very well, and then we can worry about the rest.
Yes. I think that's the correct way to do startups, and I think the idea is to test it fast, to get it out to the market fast, and if it's not working, then you kill it fast, right? And then you move on to the new one, to the new iteration. So it's iteration by iteration. I think that's how you do it in startup.
Perfect. Let's move on from the startups. I want to hear, you made a big switch in 2020 from the world of building your own startups to now being an investor in startups. What would you say makes a good investor?
Okay. Well, I'm gonna be subjective on this, right? I think back then VCs are dominated by the financial background persons, right? I think that's quite a different case in venture capital, where we focus more on startups, right? I think for me, the most important trait is you have an operational background to become a good VCs, right? Operational background means you can be a founders before, or you have an experience working for a high growth companies, like a big tech companies. I think that's gonna be very useful for your career in venture capitals, rather than I think don't get me wrong, I think financials is also the fundamentals. We want to be a good venture capitals, but it's not all that, right? Not unlike our big brothers in, let's say, like private equities, where they have very heavy in the financial aspect. But venture capital is more than that, right? You work with startup, you work with small companies, there's going to be a lot of iterations like we just discussed. I think you need to have like understanding of how the the business works and how you operate your tech companies, right? Your tech startups. So I think for me that's what makes a good VCs.
Nice. No, I completely agree. It's very hard to invest in something you've never been a part of, or like have
something like that. Something like that. Yes.
Perfect. Well, tell me a little bit more about Indonesia. I haven't had the pleasure of getting to visit Indonesia yet, but you've been able to see it over the last, you said 14 years that since you've been back, and you grew up there. But since you kind of moved back from Singapore, how have you seen kind of the tech and the startup ecosystem and VC ecosystem like change over the last few years?
Okay. Well, I think we're very much still an emerging market, right? In terms of technological adoptions, right? So that means that we haven't reached our inflection points yet. The growth is still there, so it's quite exciting. That means you will still see like more and more innovations coming out of these countries in the years to come, right? We're still way behind, China, and still behind India even, right? But the thing is, Indonesia is a very difficult market to tackle, right? First, I think demography-wise, we have a big populations, we have a young populations, but I think
just for context, a lot of my audience is American. So like to compare things that way, but I think America has a population of about 330 million right now, whereas Indonesia has a population of about 280, 290 million right now. So they're not too far away from almost the same size as the US, and that's a lot of people and a lot of like potential innovation there. So just for population context, we talked to a lot of people from Singapore and the Philippines and Japan and South America. They want to like show how big countries are by comparison. But I understand think you're really right. There's a lot of potential over the next few years.
Yeah, that comes to my second point, right? I think geography-wise, it's also challenging in Indonesia. I mean, we are a country of islands, right? We have six main islands and thousands of other small islands, right? So if it becomes a land, then the size will become as big as America, but it's not, right? It's divided, right? So I think I think the economy is only concentrated on one main island, which is the Java Islands, right? 80% of the populations live in that islands. So the economics is just going in that, one area. That means actually when we talk a lot about big populations in this sessions, but it turned out, in reality, the market is not that big, because if you see the economy is only going in this one main islands, So when startups are very, very concentrated in that area, so that means it becomes like a very intense competition for everyone to compete, right? So if we look back, right, we see like many startups coming from different sector in Indonesia. We are big in agricultures, by the way, and fishery probably, as what you have read in the news probably recently. We are big
what type of agriculture is the typical?
Yeah, it's the typical agricultures. We are a big producer of rice. Other, like like a coconut and all that, and oils as well. But I think most of the activities are happening in the rural areas, and the workers who's doing it are coming from a low education backgrounds, right? So if you're trying to tackle that issue, you're trying to introduce that technologies, you're gonna have to go through a phase where you have to do the education part, and that part is expensive and also time consuming, right? And in the era of cheap money, we will say, right, zero funding rate and all that, right? I think it's easy, to get funding, and then just spend it all on, negative margins, right? But then the last 3 years has been tough, I think, for us, for the sectors. When the things starting to get normalized, funding rates going up, funding dry up, and if you see the data, for the past 3 years, we are down 80% in terms of volumes, in terms of number of deals as well, right? And that becoming the moment of truth in Indonesia, right? And then you see, like, the customers, we found out that, the sector that are big, agriculture, fishery, is actually not sustainable, because all the time they are depending on subsidies, right? They're depending on subsidies for people to use their products, but actually, when you set up like a right pricing, people won't use it. And what another issue in Indonesia is liquidity issue, right? So we have a few IPOs in Indonesia, the big ones like Gojek and other e-commerce, but turned out it wasn't successful as well, right? So that's another issue in Indonesia, liquidity or exit for investors, right? This is
are they trying to go IPO on an Indonesian stock market, or are they using the American or
no? All of these are happening in Indonesia. I think size wise and all that, I think it's suitable for Indonesia. It's too small for probably the US stock markets, right? But what we've seen is it wasn't very successful, and it's not good. I think the idea of exit for IPO is become distant now. I think the best bet probably from acquisitions, and we definitely more like need like foreign money to coming in, right? I mean, big companies, corporates, and doing the M&A for our startups, right? And the third issue probably you've seen in the news recently, there's a few big fraud news happening in Indonesia. So fraud cases happening in Indonesia, and this happens on like a big startup, Series C, Series D startups. I haven't heard about this, but I'll look into it more and put some images on here. I think it's really reflect back on the whole ecosystems, where the confidence of investors is getting less and less. But I don't want to end the session with like a bleak future.
We'll end on a bright note, and for context, for also reference, like, America is not without its scandals either. So we've had plenty of startup founders take the investment and run. Or just take your numbers. But we'll end on a more positive note. So, like I told you before, I teach a lot of students and a lot of early stage founders, and work with a lot of early stage founders in my company that I work at. What's one piece of advice that you just wish you could tell like a younger version of yourself, that you could tell an early stage or first time founder?
Okay. Well, if you choose a career path to become a founder, it won't be an easy journey for you, right? It's very, very hard career to choose, right? It's very hard to become a founder. I've been one. I wasn't a very successful founder, but On a more practical advice that I could give is probably one is, identify real problems that, the market needs, right? And come up with like a real solutions. I think that's the fundamental one. And the second, you need to have expertise in that area as well. You be able to identify from an overview standpoint, but you need to have an expertise in that area. If you don't have it, then you have to have a co-founders. You have a team of co-founders that have an expertise in that area. And probably the third one, I think it's related to the trend that we see in Indonesia and probably globally, and of how investors see their potential deals, right? So back then it was always about growth, right, and speed, right? So I think we reset all that mindset and we going back to the fundamentals, right? So as a founders, I think you need to be mindful about the unit economics nowadays, and also you need to have a clear path to profitability, in order to get fundraise. I think growth is still important, but it's different than before. It's not everything.
Yeah. So, I completely agree. Growth is great, but cash flow is much better, especially like we see these market cycles up and down, and like there's always going to be the up, there's always going to be the downs. But like the one thing that's consistent through all is like if you are staying profitable, like no matter what, you are good, and you don't have to worry about because we haven't hit these growth metrics, we can't raise the next round, and it's going to cause these problems. It's like, all right, don't even worry about that. Just make some sales. So I say it like it's easy. It's not an easy thing. It's a very sales is a very tough part of the business. But man, Edmund, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a pleasure to get to talk to you, and I hope I get to visit sometime soon.
Yeah, let me know when you're coming down here.
Will do.
Yeah. All right. Thanks.